Question number 1 to the leader, please.
Mr. Mayor, I thank Councillor Osborne for his question. There's a detailed schedule and an answer. What I'd like to add is that in the Riverlight development currently coming out of the ground in Nine Elms, the developer has actually recruited 4 apprentices. Unfortunately, not all of them come from Wandsworth, but therein lies for us a challenge to make sure that our young people are job ready for the opportunities that will come out of that area. I'm also able to report to the Council that a local supplier at a recent Chamber of Commerce event bringing suppliers together with developers and others has landed himself a supply contract to one of the developers. This is part of our wanting to encourage local suppliers to become suppliers to developers and thereby opening both commercial and job opportunities for the people of Wandsworth.
I thank the leader for his answer, and in welcoming and supporting the provisions that he describes in his answer, can I also ask, does the employment charter for Nine Elms and its terms, is there any way in which that charter might also apply to contractors throughout the borough who are not in any way connected to the Nine Elms development? And if it's not easy to do that straightforwardly from the current agreement, is there any way in which it can be extended so that we have similar provision throughout Wandsworth for all contractors, and for that matter anybody else who comes to work in the borough?
Thank Councillor Osborne for his supplementary. In fact, it's been a long-standing practice of the Planning Department that in discussing 106 provisions, that time is taken to say to the developers that they need to enter into an agreement, and some of them willingly do, and some of them are required to do by the terms of the permission to engage with local job providers and to open up opportunities on their sites for local people.
Councillor Cousins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Did the leader see the news today that nationally the number of workforce jobs is the highest it has been since September 2008 at 31.9 million, which I think reflects the valuable work that's taking place nationally and locally to deal with the tragic and devastating impacts of Gordon Brown's economic miracle. But would he join with me in just recognising, much as I endorse and much as I recognise the value of the items outlined in his answer, but of course this is something that goes deep to the heart of Wandsworth Council and its dealing with business. It isn't just a few bits of paper or a couple of services set up. We have, in recent years, managed to leverage about £700,000 of investment in town centres throughout the Town Centre Improvement Scheme, securing 60 jobs. We've had successful bids to the Mayor for the Outer London Fund in both Balham and Tooting.
Could I remind you, Councillor Cousins, could I remind you, I did ask for brevity. Please.
No problem. It is a big subject and an important subject, as Councillor Dawson says. We, of course, have a full programme of events in our town centres supporting businesses.
Point of order,
valuable work going on in Nine Elms,
Point of order, Mr. Mayor. Can I suggest that point of order? Can I suggest that Councillor Cousins is deliberately evading your instruction, and that there should be some procedure to either force him to ask a question right now or get him to shut up?
Would he agree?
I'll add the time on there.
Would he agree with me, Mr. Mayor, that possibly the Labour Party would do better, instead of carping about council questions about important subjects, instead celebrating the valuable work locally and nationally that's ongoing in supporting people getting into jobs and supporting businesses, business creation and continuation in a time when people are still reeling from the economic miracle of Gordon Brown?
I thank Councillor Cousins for his supplementary. I mean, it's unfortunate that good news does not come in brevity, because good news comes in spades. It referred earlier to the national figures, but of course also worth noting that our high street suffers not as much as other high streets do from empty shops. A number of our high streets remain vibrant and providing both jobs and other opportunities to local residents. And of course this council has long held the enviable record of being a business-friendly borough, where we work with businesses small and large, encouraging them to take on opportunities both here and elsewhere. The Mayor for London recently highlighted one of our local businesses, the Panorama Antenna Company, supplying antenna to South Korea for all sorts of manner of entertainment, but it is remarkable that this borough has a vibrant economic base, and it's going to become even more vibrant.
Councillor Osborne.
Question number 2 to the leader, please.
I thank Councillor Osborne for his question. I mean, I'm not surprised, neither are my colleagues surprised, that the Labour opposition in Croydon would want to do what it wants to do. I mean, clearly they are talking about threats and such like, when they know that at the end of the day, the deal that there may be between whoever provides library services in this borough or in Croydon will be underwritten by the law of contract. I'm assuming that Councillor Osborne will give no succour to members of Labour Party in Croydon to break the law. And as far as his second answer is concerned, the first sentence tells it all. Things can only get better.
Councillor Osborne.
Supplementary, Mr. Mayor. If I can bring proceedings back to a more interrogative mood than Councillor Cousins had it in. Let me get something straight from the leader. If the arrangement with Croydon is not in any way risky, if, as the council leader has told this chamber on at least one occasion, the arrangement with Croydon is a good fit, then why on earth do we need an escape clause in the agreement so that we can have a standalone arrangement for the library service between the two boroughs?
Councillor Osborne will learn in due course that the strength of procurement is that not only you strike a good deal, but you also keep all your options open.
Supplementary.
Councillor Mrs Clay.
Is the leader as surprised as I am that the leader of the opposition doesn't recognise the difference between joint tendering and joint commissioning, and more importantly, doesn't recognise that competitive tendering of the library service should mean significant savings of council taxpayers' money?
I thank Councillor Clay for her supplementary. I am not surprised at Councillor Osborne's deliberate misunderstanding of the things. What this group council does know is the course we are embarked on has the support of the opposition. The course we are embarked on does actually mean that we will save our library services, and as the second part of the answer says, we will in fact enhance the provisions and save taxpayers' money.
Councillor Maxwell Scott.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Question number 3 to the Leader of the Council.
I thank Councillor Maxwell Scott for his question. The Heathrow debate has become a very fast-moving and hot debate. I mean, this morning we had the announcement from Gatwick that they would want to rely on the deal between themselves and the West Sussex County Council, that after 2019 they would want to build a second runway. Well, a second runway at Gatwick would increase enormously the capacity in south-eastern London. And clearly it is important that increased capacity must mean that we review what is necessary or needed at Heathrow. And in the Gatwick decision, I'm sort of reminded of Nicholas Soames's championing of increasing capacity in the southeast, and I hope that he will be welcoming Gatwick's announcement with open arms, since it's in his backyard, providing jobs for his community and providing valuable capacity for London and the country.
Supplementary. I'd like to thank the Leader for his answer. Would he agree with me that we have a twin responsibility here as community leaders? One is to represent our residents' wishes to not have a misguided expansion of Heathrow, but the other is to make sure that we don't, in this, we seem to be just NIMBYs. There is a hub capacity problem in this country, and we are losing a competitive edge to Frankfurt, to Amsterdam, to Paris, especially with flights to the Far East. And with our future prosperity so dependent on trade, the emerging economies to the east as well as Brazil and elsewhere, we need to make sure that decisions are made quickly and the right decisions are made. And could I ask him to please make sure that whenever possible the decision is expedited, and if that includes Howard Davies reporting before the next general election, I think we should be politically brave enough to welcome that.
I thank Councillor Maxwell Scott for his supplementary. Councillor Maxwell Scott strikes the right balance between our championing the rights and wishes of our local residents against the need of the country. What is unclear yet because the operators and the airlines don't quite come to the table with full facts, is what is the actual hub capacity need for Heathrow or for the UK market? Because airports around London have enormous capacity. They have spare capacity, and that spare capacity has not been used to its maximum. And before we go down the road of creating a hub somewhere or the other, we do need to get to the bottom of how best to use that additional capacity. But this council, as you will see in the motion, already accepts that the hub issue is an important one, and we are willing to engage, not only here but elsewhere, to say that London needs a hub, but that hub needs to be capable of fulfilling the increasing demand over more than next decade. So a new location might be the best place to provide that hub.
Councillor Locker.
Thank you. I must confess to being slightly more NIMBY-ish than my colleague, Councillor Maxwell Scott, in as much as I've come back from holiday via Heathrow this weekend. And one of the great myths, I think, that's out there is that Heathrow is well connected by public transport. And I don't know if any of you have tried to use the Piccadilly line to get into central London, let alone try and get further into southwest London. But one of the things that I see as a great advantage, if that gap... Perhaps you can afford to, Councillor Cooper. But
members, thank you.
Well, for some of us who
use
public transport, I can assure you that Heathrow is not well connected to the southwest and to our borough in particular. And that's one of the reasons why I'd like to invite the leader to continue to support the ability
Cooper,
of the trains that go to Gatwick to stop at Balham.
I thank Councillor Locker for his supplementary, and I'm glad to note that he has more in common with the majority of Wandsworth residents in that he battles to his airport by public transport, unlike the party opposite that drives around in taxis. I think what is important in the Gatwick announcement is that clearly if there is increased capacity and there are more destinations linked from Gatwick to elsewhere in the world, we in Wandsworth will have a far better journey from virtually every part of Wandsworth to Gatwick. And to that end, he is right to say that the Gatwick Express racing through parts of Balham is just not right, and it is only proper that it should stop at Balham Station where there is a Northern Line interchange.
Councillor Speck.
Question number 4 to the leader.
I thank Councillor Speck for her question. Can I just say one thing in the printed answer, which suggests that there is a proposal from Kids Company? I think that is an exaggeration. In reality, it is more like an expression of interest, and that's where we are at. The Council's plans for the Adventure Playground were formulated nearly 8 months ago. And it's taken a number of players quite a long time to come to the table. But they're welcome. And we will talk to them as they make their proposals known to us. But in the meantime, we must pursue what we have decided on.
Supplementary?
Councillor Speck.
Yeah.
Thank you. I've asked Councillor Speck for her supplementary.
I mean, I think it is sad that they haven't been taken up yet, because yes, it was months ago that they expressed interest and everything seems to have been delayed. But given that, is it not possible to keep the Kimber Road and Battersea Park adventure playgrounds going for the time being rather than starting doing anything else there until half-term and the Christmas holidays are open, so children can take advantage of them rather than just closing them down now? And then maybe we'll see whether the ideas come before anything happens.
I thank Councillor Speck for her supplementary. One fact that she might want to bear in mind is the Kids Company didn't approach us months ago. It is in the relatively recent past that they have approached us. And what we have done is continue to engage with them, and the meetings have been held with them, which is why they came with a proposal. We did the courtesy of talking to them, and we will continue to talk with them. We haven't slammed the door in their face at all. But in the meantime, what Councillor Speck is almost suggesting is to delay implementation.
Councillor Givindi, could I just ask you to sit down one moment? Madam in the gallery, we operate a very simple rule here. People who are elected to this chamber get the right to speak. I'm afraid you haven't been elected yet, would you please be quiet and allow the councillors to get on with the questions? Yes, but you have the right to vote at the ballot box. You don't have the right to interrupt the meeting. Thank you. Councillor Govindia.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. What Councillor Speck was suggesting was that we delay and delay and delay and not implement a decision that was properly taken in this chamber.
Councillor Mrs Sutters.
Supplementary. Thank you very much to the leader for his answers. Could I just be clear that we have received interest from other organisations as well as Kids Company, and it is absolutely right that we go through due process and get things perfectly dotted, dot the I's and cross the T's before we go any further.
I thank Councillor Sutters for her supplementary, and she's absolutely right. What in fact has happened, and that's been our experience, that every time we have said that a service that hitherto has been provided by a local authority exclusively could be market tested, suddenly market seems to emerge. That is exactly what we found with the library service, and I am confident that with the adventure playground proposals and other facilities the council has run so far, that there will be a market that will emerge and that will provide just as good a service as before, and probably at a far better price and a lot more responsive manner.
Councillor Dawson.
Question number 5 to the Leader of the Council.
I thank Councillor Dawson for his question. What he may also be interested to know is that yesterday at the meeting of London Council leaders, all of them agreed that academies was the future of providing schools in the capital and across the country. There was some significant support for free schools as a way of easing the shortage of school places and providing choice and diversity. As far as this council is concerned, our commitment to free school remains unchanged. We feel that that is the way forward of providing choice and diversity for parents and pupils.
Supplemental.
Councillor Dawson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Having been at one of the information meetings for the Bolingbroke Academy earlier this evening, I can bring news from the front line that is good news: enthusiastic parents, committed and dedicated staff, and therefore will the leader ensure that the message goes out that Wandsworth wants to work with free school providers and that we see it as an essential part of the developing education landscape in this borough that gives parents choice and diversity.
I thank Councillor Dawson for his supplementary, and I think I endorse entirely and agree wholly with him that we want to continue to support free schools in every way possible. And as far as I'm concerned, I think more the merrier is the approach that I'd like this council to take, because free schools will provide that choice, that aspiration that parents want for their children. Why should the children of this borough not have the best chance in life? And we believe that the best chance in life can be provided through free schools. What he might also be interested in knowing is the recent posting on the SW15 website talking about the smart uniform at the Arc Academy and the kind of uplift that young people have about their school-going places. That is the future for our kids, and I am determined that we will support that.
Councillor Belton.
Just leaving aside the specifics of free schools and talking about the variety, does it concern the leader at all that one part of our United Kingdom has suffered from segregated education on the basis of religion for many years, and it's been a major political issue in our adult lives? And I suspect he comes from countries or that have suffered also from separate religious traditions in various schools. Does he see that we might need to take special steps to avoid that kind of situation in this country? And is there any limit to the number of different types of faith schools that one borough can take?
Thank Councillor Belton for his supplementary. I think he knows perfectly well what my view on segregated schools is. Oddly enough, I grew up in a place where there were no segregated school, and I was educated in a school where all faiths and all backgrounds worked together, but in a selective system, in a system which stretched young people, gave them hope of not only a good education, but a good outcome at the end of that schooling. That is the kind of schooling I want for young people in the borough. I do share his sort of worry on the quiet, whether we could end up with too many exclusive entry type of schools. But of course the free school in fact says that the half of the places available in a free school are available for local authority to fill without any regard to the denomination nature of the school. So therein lies a way of people mixing together rather than like it happened in Northern Ireland that he alludes to.
The time for questions to the Leader is now over, and we will move to the first debate of the evening, the motion on the Heathrow Airport set out on item 19 of the agenda. But first I will call on Councillors Govindia and King to move and second their motion. Thank you.
Formally seconded.
An amendment to this motion has been circulated. Could I ask Councillor Carpenter to move his amendment?
Formally moved, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Councillor Govindia. Is the amendment agreed, Council? Thank you. The motion as amended will now be discussed. I call upon Councillor... Oh, before I get into this, I have been asked to allow Councillors Carpenter and Madden to speak for 10 minutes in this debate, and I have agreed. Councillor King.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Western civilization, as we know it, is in crisis. Our economies are in ruins, huge debts, ageing population, and enterprise tied up in red tape. Meanwhile, China and India grow at breakneck speeds, with growing militaries and a more aggressive stance towards their neighbours. If we are to survive as a civilization, we need to build a third runway at Heathrow. All then will be well. Of course, this is hyperbolic nonsense. The idea that a third runway at Heathrow would solve our economic issues in one fell swoop is poppycock. However, this hyperbole isn't too far from the claims of people that advocate expansion and a third or more runways at Heathrow. London is currently the world's greatest city. Do we want it to stay there? Absolutely. Does the city need a genuine hub airport in order to help it stay number one? Almost certainly. Is the best place for that hub Heathrow? Definitely not. The Ruskell Commission, a predecessor to the Davis Commission, identified in 1971, more than 40 years ago, that the capital needed a proper hub airport, and that Heathrow wasn't it. 40 years later, what have we got? No change. National politicians have continued to dither and try to put a sticking plaster on the problem, when what we need is a proper decision and a proper hub airport. So what does a hub airport need to look like? Well, firstly, it needs to have at least 4 runways. Not 2 or 3, at least 4, with the potential to expand even further. So the hub is up to the job not for the next 10 or 20 years, but for the next 100 years. Secondly, a hub airport needs to be affordable, not just in terms of the runway, but also in terms of the infrastructure to connect the airport and the environmental impact. Thirdly, the human impact of an airport needs to be minimised. So how does Heathrow do when compared against these criteria? Well, if Heathrow is to be our strategic hub, it needs at least 2 more runways, with room for further expansion later. Given the difficulties in producing at least only 1 additional runway, does we really think it's likely that Heathrow is ever going to be suitable to be our hub? Not likely. How does Heathrow do against affordability? Well, despite Councillor Locker's views, Heathrow's infrastructure is still better than most of the other alternatives around London, but it completely fails on pollution and environmental impact. Its close proximity to major urban areas means that it's already the cause of significant health problems. Indeed, there was a report this week from MIT which said that potentially the third runway would make things up to 3 times worse. But thirdly, we come to the human impacts of an airport, of a hub airport, and this is the biggest single failure of Heathrow. It doesn't just have a negative impact on thousands of people, or even tens of thousands of people. Heathrow has a negative impact on millions of people. And that just is far too high. That is the impact now. Add an extra one or two airports and Heathrow is a non-starter. The idea that has been suggested by one think tank last week that by having slightly quieter planes and steep approaches, somehow we can mitigate that, that's a complete nonsense. That's a non-starter. No one believes that. Quite simply, the human cost of Heathrow makes it totally unsuitable for a hub airport. So where should the Davis Commission go from here? Well, firstly, it needs to rule out Heathrow expansion. Then it needs to look at the best options for creating a hub that will see us through the next 100 years. Is that Boris Island? Time will tell. Finally, it needs to look at easing some of the short-term pressures while a proper hub is constructed. And I welcome the idea that Gatwick looks to produce a second runway. So, Western civilization will not stand or fall on the creation of an airport hub for London. London will not cease to be a great city because it does not have a proper airport hub. However, it will be less competitive. London needs a hub, but does not need a bigger Heathrow. Thank you.
Councillor Carpenter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, it's a pleasure to speak in a debate in which we have a measure of consensus across the Council chamber. I want to lay to rest the myth that Heathrow requires additional hub capacity. The only people who argue for additional hub capacity are those with a vested interest in expanding Heathrow, BAA, or Heathrow as we now have to call it, and the flying dinosaurs of former state airlines like BA, who are sitting on their nest eggs of valuable Heathrow slots for which they have paid nothing. As a customer, I want to fly direct from London to Dallas to visit my relatives. I don't want to fly via New York to suit the operating convenience of some airline. I suspect you would want to do the same. Passengers in general want to fly direct from A to B, not via C. Boeing has recognised this in its 787 Dreamliner, a 200-seat long-haul plane, specifically because it recognises that the future is point-to-point. The UK's profitable and growing airlines, EasyJet and Ryanair, only operate point-to-point services, and neither of them flies from Heathrow. So much for the argument that British business will drop dead tomorrow if we don't expand Heathrow. No, the flying dinosaurs of the 20th century have got the wrong paradigm. The past was hub and spoke, but the future is point-to-point. It's as if BA, mired in the Middle Ages, thinks that the sun goes round the earth, when actually the earth goes round the sun. So I would argue that there is no case for additional hub capacity at Heathrow. Without that argument, the case for Heathrow expansion collapses, because there are plenty of other ways of providing additional capacity in London and the South East. In its response to the 2003 consultation on the future development of air transport in the South East, Putney Labour Party argued against a third runway at Heathrow and for a second runway at Gatwick, as this produced significantly less noise and nitrogen dioxide pollution and required less land take and little infrastructure upgrade. At the time, that option was rejected, as it was considered that additional capacity was required ahead of 2019, the date when planning restrictions on Gatwick expansion fall away. Today, with 2019 only 6 years away, we will be hard-pressed to build a second runway at Gatwick in that time frame. The Gatwick expansion option also has the advantage that with an upgrade of the rail link between Gatwick and Heathrow, it would be possible to effectively operate Gatwick and Heathrow together as a 4-1 runway airport. The 20 minutes it would take to travel between Gatwick and Heathrow is less than the time it typically takes to get between terminals at a large American airport. So, for little more than the cost of a single runway, we could have the equivalent of a £30 billion Boris Island. Mr. Mayor, let me now turn to night flights, where we are calling for their progressive reduction and ultimate elimination at Heathrow. The government last consulted on this in 2004. In their 2003 white paper, The Future of Air Transport, the government accepted the World Health Organization's guidelines for community noise, albeit with a 30-year time horizon for their implementation. Achieving these guidelines is essentially incompatible with continuing night flights at Heathrow. In its response to this consultation, the Putney Labour Party pointed out that substantial reductions in the numbers of people affected by the noise of night flights could be achieved by relatively simple operational changes to the runways used for night flights. It also suggested that a progressive reduction in the limits on both numbers of night aircraft movements and noise limits could be made over a number of years to allow the aviation industry time to adjust their operating patterns. This approach remains valid today. When he was MP for Putney, Tony Coleman, by assiduous lobbying, succeeded in halving the number of night flights at Heathrow. Since she has become MP for Putney, Justine Greening has talked a lot about night flights, but achieved nothing. If she was as successful as Tony Coleman, we would have no night flights into Heathrow today. I trust that Tony Coleman's example will lead her to redouble her efforts. Mr. Mayor, I believe that the whole Chamber is united in rejecting Heathrow expansion and in continuing to campaign for an environmentally responsible aviation policy. I urge members to support the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Carpenter. Councillor Madden.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, it's all the fault of Norman Macmillan. Wing Commander Norman Macmillan, OBE, MC, was born in Glasgow in 1892, and he'd been a member of the Royal Flying Corps between 1917 and 1918. By 1925, he had become the chief test pilot with Fairy Aviation, and whilst on a test flight, crash-landed in a market garden just south of the road that runs across Hounslow Heath, an area previously frequented by highwaymen and footpads. At the time, he thought, what a wonderfully flat area. This area was known as Heath Row. At the time, Ferry Aviation were operating out of Northolt Aerodrome, but in 1928 they were given notice to quit. And Macmillan remembered his accident 3 years previously, and Ferry Aviation started buying up small parcels of land and market gardens. They paid £2,000 for 200 acres, the current site where Heathrow Airport stands. In 1930, they started to build an aerodrome with 3 runways in a triangular shape, and the Heathrow farm cottages in the middle. The rest, as they say, is history. Although in existence, the aerodrome was not used during the war, but occasionally squadrons of Hurricanes were moved there when Northolt was under threat. And it was not until 1944 that the site was acquired by the Ministry of Defence in the run-up to the D-Day landings. Plans to develop the site were feverishly opposed by the local authorities and various other ministries, so there's no change there. On the 1st of January 1946, the site was transferred to the Ministry of Civil Aviation, and on the 10th of January the same year, the government agreed a massive expansion of the site, north of the Bath Road, which would lead to the demolition of the villages of Harmondsworth and Sipson on the site of the currently proposed third runway. There was uproar, and the various government departments and ministers were at loggerheads. The folly of constructing a third runway north of the A4 is nothing new. It has been with us for 66 years. And it was not until 1953 that this madcap idea was shelved. 55 years later, it's been resurrected. Work did continue on the existing site, and by 1950 there were 6 runways at Heathrow in the shape of a hexagram. When I went to work there in 1968, they were down to 3 runways. The 2 runways that we know today and a cross runway to be used in emergencies, and that is in fact still the position today. The other 3 runways became taxiways. For the past 66 years, the Civil Aviation Authority and latterly the British Airports Authority, now known as Heathrow Limited, have tinkered at the edges, adding a bit here, modernising a bit there, and what we're left with is a mishmash of buildings, runways, poor public transport, and a bad road transport infrastructure. I don't blame Norman Macmillan. Little did he know that the airline industry would expand as much as it has. But the perceived wisdom is that in this day and age, no one in their right mind would build an airport, particularly one with runways which run east-west, due west of a major conurbation. The prevailing winds at Heathrow will always mean flights landing over the city for 80% of the time, with the resulting impact on the residential quality of life. The announcement by Gatwick Airport Limited, mentioned already by the leader today, that they're going to hopefully build a second runway, is good news. Their runways also run east-west, but they're due south of the city, and so they don't impact on the residential or the residents of London. It's about time that the government took the bull by the horns and developed a proper strategy for aviation in the southeast. No more tinkering with Heathrow, which is no longer fit for purpose. Forget all notion of a third runway. That idea went skywards nearly 60 years ago. A third runway would be at full capacity within 10 years and obsolete, leading to demands for a fourth runway and then a fifth runway till they catch up with Beijing, which is currently building its 8th runway. But there again, it's illegal to be a NIMBY in China. The number of aircraft movements of 480,000 per annum is reaching capacity, but only because the airport operator, ever mindful of a quick buck, allows non-essential flights. Flights to short-haul destinations, including Birmingham. Holiday charter flights, better suited to Gatwick, Stansted and Luton. Private jets, which could use Northolt. Cargo flights, which could use other airports, such as Manchester and Birmingham, and empty positioning flights. These flights account for more than 10% of the current aircraft movements. Get rid of them, and 50,000 extra long-haul flights could take their place. Heathrow happened by accident, and it's about time that we stop trying to fix it and start afresh somewhere sensible. I suspect that Norman Macmillan, who died in 1976, aged 84, would have been appalled by what had occurred in the almost 90 years since his crash landing. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Madden. Councillor Cuff.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Very interesting to listen to the speeches made by my colleagues so far. I think in my mind, we have to answer a very simple question as a city. We need more capacity, more aviation capacity for sure, but does it go to Heathrow, or can London support a second hub airport in the capital? And in one corner we have BAA, who tell us that the only solution is Heathrow because it's not economically viable for the city to support anything but one large airport. And in the other corner we have Boris, who says Heathrow's had it, it's simply not viable anymore to run it at Heathrow, and we need to move everything lock, stock and barrel to Kent. Now, the BA argument, of course, ignores all the campaigning and all the problems that Heathrow has caused a large part of London residents over the many, many years. And we simply, as we agree here, believe it's not a flyer. Sorry to mix metaphors. But Boris' solution also, I think, definitely ducks the small matter of the 30 to 40 billion it will cost to pretty much create a new airport up front. I mean, it's not just one thing to find the money, but you've got to put it all up front, which simply, in my mind, is not economically viable. And not to say there's the long-term ramifications of essentially moving quite a large part of the economy, which is organically built up around Heathrow over the last few years. So I think there has to be a middle way. I mean, Heathrow will stay at the same capacity, in my mind, it currently operates on, but something has to increase. Now, BAA says London can't possibly sustain the second hub, but if you allow me to draw a parallel with the Big Bang in 1988, this city has had a similar debate before in a different context. Remember the calls in the 80s for more office space during the financial boom. The city was unwilling to expand, didn't want to expand, and so along came Canary Wharf, much to the roar of the disapproval of the establishment, who argued that the city could not possibly sustain 2 commercial districts. And yet, Canary Wharf has been successful, and so has the city. There are 2 commercial districts now, and Canary Wharf has generated 500,000 jobs and billions of pounds of investment in the economy. So it can happen. You can support 2. And look at other world cities. New York has JFK to the east on Long Island, but it also, United now, the world's largest airline, has moved to Newark and on the other side of the city to provide a second hub for that conurbation. Washington, Tokyo and Moscow also have 2 hub airports. So there's nothing, I don't think, in my mind, to stop London from doing the same. Indeed, it's now a case, I think, of deciding which of those existing other airports you take the second hub to. You saw the Gatwick announcement today. But I believe that this could have happened a long time ago if BAA had, of course, not owned those 2 other airports and therefore had very little incentive to spend money on trying to expand them. And it's interesting that now the Competition Commission has changed the ownership, what might happen and what opportunities might exist. Now, if I were to put my finger in the air very quickly into the wind and say what my solution would be, I would argue for Stansted, because whilst it's certainly a long distance at the moment from London, it has a different catchment area. It's the other side of the city, and there's an opportunity to link it up to Crossrail for the small cost of 3 billion, but I think far cheaper than the 30 to 40 billion that would result if you created an entire new airport from scratch. But I suppose my point I'd finish on is this, and I echo the points made by Councillor Maxwell Scott and others. It really is time a decision was made by the government on this, and I very much hope that it can be brought forward before the next election, and we all have certainty about where the future of aviation in this country will lie. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cuff. Councillor Mrs Cooper.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. Fellow councillors, like Councillor Carpenter, it's a pleasure to speak in a debate where members on both sides of this council chamber are united against the expansion of Heathrow. We're local councillors, we're local residents, and both as councillors and residents, we have experienced personally the noise and the pollution, so it's hardly surprising that that's how we feel. However, despite our unanimity against Heathrow expansion, this may not extend to opposition to the Thames Estuary Airport. I wasn't quite clear from what some colleagues were saying whether they were completely against it. I have to say I think it is complete madness. Madness for the reasons that Councillor Cuff just alluded to, although he didn't say madness, he was being probably slightly more polite. The excessive cost, I think, means that it is Fantasy Island rather than Boris Island, or perhaps that's the same thing. But also, as well as being Fantasy Island, it too, like Heathrow, is in the wrong place. It's not in the wrong place because it's to the west of London, it's in the wrong place because it's in an estuary that is full of migratory birds. We've just heard very recently about a crash in Nepal, which, as far as I understand it, was caused by birds being sucked into the engine of the plane. Now, you know, building an airport in an area that's full of migrating birds has to be madness of the first degree, but I actually think it's going to be the money that will rule it completely out of ever happening. Now, whilst we're also both keen to hear proposals from Stansted, Luton and Gatwick, and several members have mentioned those interesting comments from Gatwick only today, making this debate extremely topical, and we all recognise, I think, that there is currently spare capacity at Gatwick right now without any expansion. We may not be quite so united over the timescale. Now, I have heard several members speaking in the debate saying that they think that, I think Councillor Madden said that the bull should be taken by the horns, although that sounds slightly complex if you're talking about aircraft. But I do think it's absolutely essential that the government moves ahead with sorting out some final proposals before the next election, in fact, as soon as possible. So I'm very pleased to hear people have said that. Mr Mayor, local people in this borough, especially in Battersea and Putney, where there are more flights over than there are in Tooting, which is more stacking rather than the direct flights coming in, need central government, whoever is in charge of it, to commit now and to make it absolutely clear that they are completely against any further expansion at Heathrow, and fully support expansion at Gatwick, which Councillor Madden has set out the reasons why that's a good location for expansion. But if necessary, additional expansion at both Stansted and Luton. The improvements in the rail links to Luton have been immense in the last few years. It's now quite a fast journey if you're going up from central London up to Luton. Stansted is a bit more difficult to get to, and certainly from our point of view in southwest London, a lot more difficult. But that's one of the reasons why some of the building in the links between Gatwick and Heathrow makes some sense as well. I never actually thought I'd ever stand in this chamber and say this, but I do actually agree with Councillor Maxwell Scott, who luckily is not in the room, so he fortunately won't be able to hear this. But I do think we do need to be pressing, as a council, for an early decision on Heathrow and an early decision on hub capacity. Councillor Madden has also correctly identified the fact that some flights, tourist flights, and also cargo can easily go elsewhere. I think it's actually a shame that the motion from Councillors King and Govindia doesn't encompass some of the points that we've been making in this debate. We fully endorse it, as I think you will have gathered from what Councillor Carpenter and what I have been saying. We want a decision made on this as soon as possible against Heathrow expansion, against a Thames Estuary airport, and fully in favour of expansion at Gatwick, which, as Councillor Locker has pointed out, is extremely well connected to South West London and far more so than Heathrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Cooper. Councillor Govindia.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can I say that Councillor Madden's speech reminded me of obvious truth that there was yet another Scotsman who was left a mess behind for us to clear up. It's been a joy to work with Councillor Carpenter over this motion, and it's obviously a joy because we both agreed to an amendment, and I'm not so sure whether that joy would have been so great if I'd had to work with Councillor Cooper. Because, in fact, we have got a unanimity, because that is what we have. Councillor Carpenter and I agreed that this is the motion that we could both support. And I think the message from this chamber is very clear to the government. Take Heathrow off the table and make a very quick decision, and let's get on with it. That's a very simple message from this council, and I think from many other authorities across London. Heathrow is in the wrong place. Councillor Madden gave us a history about it, but it is in the wrong place because there are 2 million people living in the under its flight path. They are kept awake many times, and actually kept awake by flights that come in from Nairobi. And yet the BAA would say to you, it is vital for national economic interest. I fail to understand how a flight arriving from Nairobi, keeping half of the people of Hounslow awake, adds to the national economic upturn. But perhaps they will tell us. Clearly, Councillor Carpenter's absolutely made the right point, that this is people with vested interests, protected vested interests. BAA owns Heathrow. It's the only airport they own. They want to talk it up because it's their great asset. They want to make it work better than any other airport. They want to see off all the other challenges. BA have built a terminal there, which means that virtually everything that BA flies comes there and is got a single point, and no wonder they are in cahoots with each other. BAA has not played fair with people in London on this particular campaign. They have not been honest, and no wonder they have now changed their name, because we know how tarnished BAA is. Of course, in changing the name, they've confused us all, because we now don't know whether to talk about Heathrow as a place or a company or some outfit, foreign-owned and unconcerned about London's assets. There's another point I'd make about how difficult this debate has been, because airlines will not free up slots, and when they do free up slots, they don't actually fly to where UK PLC wants them to fly. So recently, BMI-BA merger meant that there were 3 or 4 slots free, and where do those slots go to? Not to some emerging economy in China, town in China, but they go to Alicante, because they can fill the flight. Now, if they are talking about the national interest and asking us to take the pain on behalf of the national interest, they should in fact take some of the decision that is in the national interest. Generally, they have taken no decision that is in the national interest. Mr. Mayor, the one other point I'd make is about Boris's intervention in this particular debate. He is on the same page as we are. Make the decision quickly and take Heathrow off the table. Now, he in fact has also said that it isn't just Boris Island that he's wedded to. He's talked about it as an option. Stansted is obviously an option. He is also willing to look at a Heathwick option, although there are some downsides to that particular thing. All I can say is that London, with 5 airports around it, has no problem with capacity. It is better management of that capacity can create all the capacity we need. The issue of the hub, well, Councillor Carpenter makes a very important point, that most people want to fly point to point. But, of course, the whole airline industry and our airport competitors sell their airports on a hub basis. And perhaps we cannot dismiss it just because that's the competition. We need to look at it carefully, but we cannot look at it carefully by just simply keeping, for West Londoners, keep on taking the pain of early arrivals, being kept awake at night, having the highest air quality pollution of any airport in Europe, in a European country, and the most congested road and rail network, which makes it incredibly difficult as an experience for a passenger. You want to be able to arrive at an airport and board your flight in some sort of peace, rather than having fought through your way through capital's congested roads and rail networks. Mr. Mayor, it's very good to welcome unanimity across both sides in here, and I think a unanimity that is shared outside this chamber amongst both people and other local authorities. We say very plainly, take Heathrow expansion off the table, tell Davis's commission to report early, let's get a decision in interest of UK PLC that is actually fit for both UK PLC and challenge the vested interests at BA and BAA to get it right.
Thank you. The matter now before the Council is the motion on the agenda concerning Heathrow Airport, proposed by Councillor Govindia and seconded by Councillor King as amended earlier. Is that agreed? Thank you. We now come to questions to the Cabinet members and Chairman, which will be taken until the 45-minute continuous period for questions and answers has ended. Councillor Belton.
Yeah, on a point of order. I think this is just a hiccup in the new arrangements, but if we take the adjournment motion at the end of the questions, which was the normal situation before this new arrangement, then we get 2 adjournment motions in. If you take it after these questions, I'm going to be pushed out. So of course, I can move the adjournment now, but then Councillor Madden might object. But, you know, so if he's going to move it, will he move it now, please?
Councillor Madden, would you like to put us out of our misery? Because I'm
Mr.
dying to know
Mayor,
what you're going to do.
Councillor Belton to be pushed out. And I'm sure he's got something very valuable to say. But in the interests of democracy, I'm happy to move my adjournment motion at this stage, if that's convenient for the...
Then I think you should bite the bullet.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, most of us visited the Olympic Park or watched the Olympics and the Paralympics on the television during the summer. If, like me, you marvelled at the scale and grace of the Olympic Stadium, it may well come as a surprise for you to know that the architects for this stadium were Populous, who have their headquarters in Deoda Road in Putney, within my ward. You probably have not heard this before, and simply because LOCOG rules prevented the company from publicising their own involvement in the Olympics for at least a year after the event finished. Mr. Mayor, I'm proposing an adjournment of the Council for 30 seconds to recognise the fantastic contribution of Populous, a world-class local business, to the acknowledged success of the Olympics and Paralympics in London in 2012.